The other day I posted a short of a Harry Hood jam, and it was really fun to do, but it was quite a challenge to try to get across certain concepts in such a short period of time. It was just a minute-long jam. So I thought I'd do a deep dive here, and we'll focus on two main concepts. The first of which will be syncopation. I'll explain what that is and how you can practice it and get more familiar with it. And the second thing is improving phrasing by creating musical questions and musical answers, or you can think of it as call and response. And I'll give a couple examples of Trey using these concepts so we can hear it in action and then hopefully apply it. Just to kind of set the scene, here's a clip of Trey making use of syncopation. And try not to overthink it too much if this is a newer concept. Just really listen to how it sounds and how it feels. Focus on that first, and then we'll get into kind of how to do it in a second. In a nutshell, syncopation is using the weaker beats or the off beats in a measure. And to drive this point home, I'm going to just give a simple example of a two-note melody, which a lot of times is how Trey will start a Harry Hood jam, really, really sparse, really simple, and he kind of builds it from there. And by the way, the chord progression is D, A, G. So it's really simple, really beautiful. We're going to take a two-note pattern that goes like this. It's going to go D to C sharp and back to D. The reason I'm choosing those two notes is because D is the root of D, which is the tonic. It's the key we're in. C sharp is the major third of the A, that is the second chord, and then going back up to D works really well because D is the fifth of G. So all those notes just really fit really well, and it's really simple. So at first, let's just take that two-note melody and let's count in quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's shift. Instead of counting in quarter notes, let's count in 16th notes. And what we're going to do is just kind of displace that rhythm by a 16th note and get a feel for what it's like to be on those offbeat kind of gray areas. Instead of just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll count 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. And we'll shift all the notes to the E of each quarter beat. So instead of being on 1, it'll be 1 E. Instead of being on 2, it'll be 2 E. And then 3 E, 4 E. So just like that, we're going to follow that pattern. Let's start out nice and slow. So 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Let's do the same thing, but now shift it over to the and of each beat. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. One more time, we'll shift it to the of each beat. So now it'll be 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Hopefully it's coming across already how different those simple two notes can feel just by moving things around a little bit. I think so often we get enamored with scales and chord tones and all these kind of things, maybe modes, stuff like that. We forget about the power of rhythm. I think rhythm and percussive things are the most primal form of music, and we can get so much out of it. I have a loop set up with the chord progression. I'm going to play what I just did, but with the chords so you can hear it in context and hear how it shifts things around. So here's the chord progression. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. Now I'm going to start with the quarter beats. Ready? And 1 and 2 and 3 and a 4 and a 1 E and a 2 and a 3. Shift it over and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and now and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and now the 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Hopefully it came across how different that feels, especially with the chords keeping like a steady rhythm going there. I don't know, to me that feels quite different if I place a note on the of a quarter beat instead of on the quarter beat. There's a lot of power in that. The really cool thing about thinking more percussively and using things like syncopation, or just thinking in terms of creating a rhythmic motif that you're building off of instead of maybe a scale motif, is that then when you start to shift positions, you can take the same rhythm, the same syncopation maybe, and it'll feel a little different and sound different, because if you move positions, you'll be using different notes. So a lot of times Trey will start out in sort of this, you can think of it like, a D chord in what a lot of people would think of as the G shape, like this. So he's kind of working out of that zone, and he'll kind of, do some syncopation here, maybe kind of like, and then move it up. So we could take that same kind of rhythm. I'm not trying to be too precise or overthink it, kind of like do da da do gat da do. Even like as silly as that sounds, beatbox it. Try to internalize the rhythm that you want to use. Really let it settle in, and then hopefully it comes out in your melody. But when you shift up into a different position, so instead of being in like a G chord position, I went up here to more of like the upper structure of like a bar chord, if you think of it like that. So then when you take that same rhythm, it's hitting on different notes than the lower zone. But to the listener, there's a cohesiveness to that, because we know there's something familiar, and it's the rhythm. It's not the notes. The notes aren't as important sometimes as we think they are. This now ties into the next idea I wanted to talk about, which is Trey's use of call and response, or creating a musical question and a musical answer. And I was really struck by this at the Van Andel shows over the summer. I got to see the first night when Billy Strings came out, and I was really enamored with how beautifully Trey phrases his leads, to a point where it sounds so hooked up and so put together that it almost sounds like he pre-wrote the lead, but he's just coming up with it on the spot using a couple different strategies. So one of which is, let's say you take that syncopation and create one little motif with it. So I'll do, this is similar to what I did in my short, something like, so I'm thinking of the drum beat there, not the notes so much. Do da 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 da. That's the rhythmic template I'm going to use. That will be like the musical question, and then answer it back with a variation. So let's say we do, and then back. Then there was a second answer, the second round. And this just, it creates something tangible for the listener to latch onto. I think it's exciting when we can kind of follow along and hear what's going on. I mean, we've probably all had that experience where we see a guitar player that can really shred and they can play really fast, but there's nothing so much to follow, because there's nothing that repeats. There's no pattern we can hook up to. We love the human mind, the human ear, and we love patterns. We really, to the point where we can latch onto patterns when maybe they don't even exist. But the point is, if we give a little pattern for ourselves and to the listener, it's like a little gift. It's like, here's something you can follow along with and be on the journey with me. So it's not just me just flowing around, but like we're having a conversation. Then you can take that syncopation and a little rhythmic motif, and then you can move it up to a different position. And now it's even more powerful, because now you can keep the rhythm. You don't have to overthink it, but because of the position you're in, it'll inspire a different kind of thing. Let's suppose that I've moved up positions now, more to this kind of 10th fret area, and using like a simple triad form. Now, if we take that rhythm, plug it in as the musical question, we can create different musical answers, and we can really flow really with less effort, because we're not stressing out about the mode or the notes we're using. We've got a solid shape we're going off of, and then using the rhythm to drive it forward. So let's say we're kind of, then it just gets you in a different area. And that kind of thing I think is exciting, and it helps you to build up into a really big peak with, again, minimal effort. And you can, pick your spots where you're going to do a little shreddy kind of lick or whatever you want to do, or maybe it's more of a scale run, but have that be almost like an afterthought to the rhythm that you're creating. So let me now take this and put the track back on so you can kind of hear it in action and hopefully see what I'm talking about here. So let's start with that motif down here. Then So then I moved it up to another position at the end, which is more like, you could think of it like the D shape way up here, in service of trying to build up to more of a peak. The human ear, we equate like louder and higher with better, even though it might not necessarily be the case. That is the reality of the situation. When we think of Trey really peaking on a solo or whoever it is, a lot of times we're looking for that higher note that they're going for, that higher level. Using the rhythmic motif allows you to free yourself up a little bit to move those positions and already have sort of a plan in place. And then you just kind of plug in the notes you want to do based on where you're at. And you can add more complexity and say to yourself, I'm going to hit this chord tone or that chord tone. But I would say let the rhythm be your foundation. Like, start with that so you don't have to overthink things. You can just kind of feel it from that rhythmic spot and hopefully get a ton of mileage out of it. So let me know some of the things you like to use in a jam like Harry Hood that's more of the kind of that major sound, the Ionian kind of vibe. What is your starting point? Like, do you think of a scale first, or maybe a chord shape? I know for me, I really like to start with that rhythmic kind of foundation. All right, thanks so much for watching. Hope you got something out of that, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.